Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Okay, so today's video is just basically some recent reads that I haven't talked about. I haven't reviewed these on camera for you, and so I thought I would do that. I thought about doing a July wrap-up, and I was gonna do that, but honestly, I talked about all of the books that I read in vlog, so I'm just gonna list the titles and give a star rating, and then I'm gonna get into the books that I haven't talked about yet. Some of them were at the end of July, and some of them were actually this month, because I do be feeling like I've been getting a lot of books read. So, okay, so here are the books that I read in order in July and a star rating. So the first book that I read is Loving Romeo, Small Town Contemporary Romance. I gave this 3 stars. The next book I read is Unsteady by Peyton Corinne. This is a new adult hockey romance. I gave this 5 stars. It was one of my favorite books of the month. I loved it. The next book that I read is Again the Magic, which was a reread for my Fable book club. This is one of my favorite books of all time. I gave it 5 stars once again. And then I read Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson, which is book 2 in the Stormlight Archive, and I gave that 5 stars as well. Loved it. And then I read A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher. This was an ARC that I received. I love T. Kingfisher. I gave this 5 stars. My in-depth review is in a recent reads video. I think the last recent reads video before, it wasn't a vlog. It's in that. Then I read Play Along by Liz Tomforty. I gave that 3 stars. And then I read The Autumn Bride, a historical romance, which I gave 4 stars. My friends, I apologize for the interruption. This is Editing Crystal here, just to say that I forgot to mention the 3 novellas that I read in my 24-hour reading vlog, which was, I did that on July 31st. I have a vlog up with my full thoughts on those, but I'm just going to tell you the titles and my star rating, so I apologize for that. I finally read The King's Spinster Bride by Ruby Dixon, really enjoyed it, gave it 4 stars. And then I read Night of Cake and Puppets by Laini Taylor. Amazing, 6 stars, beautiful, loved this so much. I waxed poetic about it, hopefully, in my reading vlog. And then I also read Gentlemen Prefer Heiresses by Lorraine Heath, which I gave 3 stars, and truthfully this was a little bit disappointed on me just because it was so heavily physically attraction. Those are the other 3 that I did not mention. So, back to the other video. Okay, so now let's talk about the books that I haven't talked about. So the first one that I have to mention is The Body in the Bookstore. This is a cozy mystery. I'd never read a cozy mystery before, and this actually is my exclusive Patreon review for Patreon. I just started a Patreon last month. If you want to come join, you know, the link is always down below. I do reading sprints. This month we're doing a buddy read book club where we're going to have a live show, and I'm going to do an exclusive vlog for that. And if you join my Patreon, you get to vote on what I read, and we hang out and chat. It's a fun time, so if you want to do that, the link is down below. If you want my full review on that, you're gonna have to join Patreon, because that was the book they picked for July. Okay, so now into the rest of the book. So then I read Edgedancer by Brandon Sanderson. This is a novella in the Stormlight Archive, and you are supposed to read this after book 2 before you start Oathbringer, because there are some plot essentials and character information that you need to know in here. So I'm not really going to go into the details of what this little novella is about. We're basically following a character called Lift. She's a young woman. She made a deal with someone that she would never die, that she would live forever, and that is sort of not turning out how she expected it to be, and she has powers where she can kind of like glide and move everywhere, and she's an interesting character, but I will say I gave this 3 stars. I gave this 3 stars. I think I maybe gave it 4 on Goodreads, but you know, there is a certain type of character voice that Brandon Sanderson has done in his YA books. Up to this point, I haven't really seen that in the Stormlight Archive. I have seen it in some of his other books. That just feels very, very, like, childish and immature. And it fits the character, right? Like, Lift, this character is a very young character. She is immature. But her character voice was so annoying to me, I could not even handle it. Like, this was painful to get through. And this was one of his novellas, and it was still like a 6-hour audiobook, and I was just like, when is this going to be done? I can't stand to be in this character's head anymore. And so I didn't enjoy this because I couldn't stand her character voice. But all of that being said, I do think that it shows his range as a writer, even though he has used this type of humor and this type of character in situations that I've read before from him. But then when I started Oathbringer, which I'm currently reading, which is book 3 in the Stormlight Archive, it was like, it was so interesting just to see how clear his vision for his characters are, because they don't sound anything like Lift. And I think a lot of times people will assign the humor that's in Edgedancer to Brandon Sanderson overall, and that's not true. That is this specific character's voice, which I found to be utterly annoying, and just, I did not like reading this. I kind of almost wish I hadn't read it at all, because I didn't like it at all. Like, it really bummed me out. She was just so annoying. I couldn't stand her. Oh gosh, just the type of, like, almost like a very stereotypical teenage type of humor, and I was just like, ugh, when is this gonna be done? But all that being said, I got the information that I needed, and I could move on to Oathbringer, so that's what I'm doing now. But that definitely dissuaded me from picking up any more of his novellas. I mean, anyway, moving right along. Okay, the next book that I read, okay, y'all, I have talked about this book before. I went into detail about the issues that I was having with the writing, so I did finally finish Quicksilver by Callie Hart. Now, my friends, I am so conflicted about this book. I am so conflicted. I feel like I'm very conflicted about a couple of books I'm going to mention now, because I went on a big Romantasy kick. And one of my problems with Romantasy, and I don't mean this, I know it's going to sound bad, I don't mean it to, I feel like the writing quality is kind of poor. It doesn't feel polished, it doesn't feel like it's been edited very well, and that's one of my biggest stumbling blocks when it comes to Romantasy. Typically indie published Romantasy, and that was very evident here in Quicksilver. So I'm going to direct you to my previous video, I'll link it down below, my recent reads. That one also has the T. Kingfisher review in there, where I go into detail about the issues I was having with the writing, but it boils down to essentially the first, at least for sure, the first 30% of this book was so poorly edited. There were word choices that were incorrect, like she uses the incorrect words. And when I say edited, I'm not talking about typos, I'm not talking about punctuation, I'm literally talking about words, sentence structure, things that make, for me, a really bad reading experience that doesn't allow me to really get into the story. So, my opinion on the writing of specifically the first 30%, it's the same, right? The writing is a barrier to entry to this book, I feel like. And I know, like, I'm part of a Discord with a bunch of book talkers who also like fantasy and Romantasy, and they were all reading it at the same time, and people were, like, DNFing it left and right, and I was like, whoa, okay. And I talked about in my last video how I was really, really tempted to DNF it, but I didn't, because a book that gets this much hype, I just have to see why. And all of that being said, despite all of the writing issues, I was still very curious about the story. I was very curious about where she was headed with the story, and I was also very curious about this relationship, which, at the point I was before, hadn't really developed much at all, and I was really interested to see what's going to happen here, you know? So that's a lot of props to an author to do that, because I've read a lot of books where that element of curiosity is just not there. Like, the writing is so bad, I'm like, I just don't care. I cannot get through this, right? So if the writing was an issue for you, I get it. I totally do. You know, seeing my friends, like, DNF this sort of made me feel like I just have to see, right? I have to see for myself if I can enjoy this, and mostly if I can enjoy it and what the hype is about. So I finished the book. It took me a while because it's very long, and I will say I feel like it's overly long. Not wrong. It's overly long. It doesn't need to be this long. There is so much in this book that could be parsed down that we don't need, is not information that progresses the story, that builds the world. It's essentially there that feels like it was left in as an exploratory draft while she's figuring things out. But we as the reader, we don't need that information. It needs to be cut down. This book didn't need to be this long. It shouldn't have been this long. So that's another ding against it. However, I will say, I did see why this book is so hyped. I get it. And you will be happy to know that for me, I don't feel like it is the spice. There is spice in here, steam in here, but I don't feel like that is what, at least from my point of view, I don't feel like that's the selling factor here. But what I do feel like is the selling factor is the hero, Kingfisher. Okay, so the basic premise of this book, it's set up in what feels like a very dystopian world, but we're not quite sure if it's our world or something, you know, like kind of similar. It is high fantasy, but in the beginning, it feels like maybe this is kind of like an urban fantasy type of thing where it's close to our world. So it feels like it's kind of Hunger Gamesy in that way, where districts are established, and the district that we're in is with our heroine, who is struggling. Like, water is a huge resource that is lacking. Like, she is struggling to survive. She finds herself caught by this guard. She ends up stealing his metal gauntlet, I believe, glove, and she, you know, takes it thinking that she could melt it down and have some resources to provide for her and her brother because they're orphans. She ends up getting caught down the road by the guards and is almost going to be put to death when something happens with the metal and her. There's something specific about her and her ability to manipulate metal that is dangerous and kind of very much otherworldly. It's not human, while she is seemingly human, and it allows her this moment to escape because she melts this pool of Quicksilver, and up pops this our Fae hero, who was this dark, broody hero, pulls her down into the Fae realm, and that is where our story begins. So he takes her to the Fae realm. He sees she has this power with Quicksilver, and he wants to utilize that to save his kingdom and his people. So he essentially puts her to work to try and figure out this alchemy ability that she has and how he can use that to save his people. So she's there under duress. They're very much an enemies to lovers situation. And, you know, that is a big draw, I'm sure, for a lot of people. But what I really, really loved about this, the thing that I loved the most, was their dynamic. I found it to be very fascinating and really fun and enjoyable because he's very dark, he's very broody, he really is a dark, broody hero, almost to the point of, like, you're annoyed with him, you know? So if you don't like that type of hero, this is not going to be for you at all because it's strong like that. And she is also the type of heroine that is a little bit sassy and kind of does things that aren't in her best interest because she's so sassy, and she kind of talks back and fights back, and you're just like, why are you so stupid? But at the same time, she's also brave and things like that. So I'm not selling this book at all because honestly, I'm still kind of perplexed, and my rating on this is kind of fishy to me because I'm not sure how to rate it, because there's a lot about this book that didn't work. There's a lot about this book that needed to be better executed, like a lot. But I do feel like this is a pretty unique take on Fae and their ability to work with metal, which again was something that in the beginning I was sort of like, why would you choose metal when iron is typically a Fae's weakness? And we've already established that you're following some of the Fae rules in that they can't lie, so I don't really understand what's happening here. So I thought that was a pretty unique and clever world. I thought that their romance was really great, and it took a long time to develop. It was very much a slow burn enemies to lovers, which I really enjoyed. And I think that the sort of like indefinable thing that has me like really feeling like I both love and hate this book is that the specific dynamic of the relationship reminds me of a paranormal romance hero that I really, really love. The type that is, you know, a lot alpha and wants to control her, and does at times control her, puts her under his will, under duress, and she still is just continually drawn to him, so it has a little bit of like a dark romance vibe in that way too. While at the same time we get to see that that's not exactly how he feels towards her or for her. He has these soft feelings for her. He's keeping a lot of things hidden that kind of very slowly get unveiled throughout the whole of this book. So I did really end up enjoying this, and there's parts of it that I really, really loved, but there's also parts of this that just don't work. And I wish that it had been a little cleaner, edited as far as on a sentence level, but also edited on a big picture level, because the plotting in this is also something that isn't great. There are moments where the story moves along really well, and then we kind of get stuck in a spot that just feels like, okay, what's gonna happen next? And I kind of started to lose interest. So I don't know, y'all. I don't know that this is a book that I can recommend. I don't. But if you like that type of hero and you really are wanting that type of a romantic relationship, I would check it out. But again, the first 30% is kind of painful to get through. So, I mean, I imagine this is going to get picked up by a traditional publisher, and I'm hoping that when it does, it gets cleaned up there. But I also feel like that doesn't always happen. So I gave it 3 stars, and I liked it. I did like it. So, okay, moving right along. Okay, so now the next book that I read is Embers in the Snow. So I had not even heard about this book until I actually heard about it from Jen from the Book Refuge. I was having reading sprints on Patreon and we were talking about what we were reading, and she mentioned that this is what she was reading, and it's basically a fantasy romance with a vampire hero, and she was loving it, and I was like, I love vampires too, and I need to read this book as well. So I picked it up as my next read. I got the audio. The audio narration is fantastic, truly. I feel like if I had not listened to the audio of this, I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much, because I freaking adored the audio. The male narrator is fantastic. I believe it's Shane East. He did an excellent job. This was just so fun to listen to, and I loved it, and I gave it 5 stars. I did. Even though, like, there are a few pet peeves that I have with fantasy romance that happened in here, I just feel like I can't read. I want a really great fantasy romance, and I keep having these issues show up in them that I'm looking for in a traditional fantasy book, and they show up in fantasy romances, and I get frustrated, and I don't want to be frustrated, so I feel like my ratings for these 3 books are kind of loosey-goosey, and for maybe the first time in a long time, the vibes, not the vibes of the story, but the vibes that I feel, the way I feel about these romances is what's powering through my ratings. So, I loved their romance. It's basically a heroine. She ends up in an arranged marriage who she believes is going to be, I think, the Duke, this older guy, and then it ends up that she's marrying his son, who is, you know, this dark, broody hero. He's very mysterious. He's here back from the war, and there's something very mysterious about him. She doesn't know what. And the way that they first meet was fantastic and very full of vampire lore and vampire moments that I love. Like, this is the type of vampire romance where there's something about her blood that he specifically needs and craves and desires, and that's all connected with the way that he feels about her. Oh, it was so good. I just loved it. It was also a very soft romance. Like, you think it's set up to be something that's hard, but they fall in love very quickly. I've heard people say it's insta-love. I don't feel like this is insta-lust at all. I feel like it could be insta-love in the way that A Fated Mates is, where they just feel like they met their person and then we get to see them fall in love, and it's really quite beautiful. And I love the fantasy elements of this. I love the vampire. There are other fantastical elements that pop up later that I don't want to talk about because they're spoilers, which were fun. So it's not just a pure vampire romance. And I just enjoyed this so much. I did have a little bit of an issue with the plotting structure in the way that, you know, because the romance is kind of resolved early on, we don't have a lot of conflict in the romance, and so then it is relying on the fantasy world. But I also feel like there were a little bit of holes in the fantasy world so that plot didn't really carry enough weight for me to care. I was more invested in the couple. So that kind of slowed things down for me too. And then also, this is a huge pet peeve of mine, a personal pet peeve of mine with world building. I absolutely hate it when authors do the world building through introspection in the character's head, when they're thinking about the history of their world, or they're thinking about past events that have to do with the world. All of that is so the reader can know how this world exists, and I hate that. That's something that to me is just indicative of lazy writing. So you're not really showing us the world through things that are happening with the character. You're giving it all to us in thoughts and introspection, and that's okay for part of it, right? I think it's very difficult for an author to build a fantasy world and get that information to the reader in a way that's easy to consume and internalize. But I just particularly hate it when so much of it is done through internal thoughts. I don't like that. I hate that type of world building so much. Okay, so the next book is, so yeah, I'm sorry, I got frustrated, I got distracted because my dogs were barking and I shut the camera off for a minute. This is a very professional video. So, Embers in the Snow, 5 stars. If you're looking for a vampire romance, a fantasy romance, and you want a soft, beautiful, just romantic love story, I would highly recommend this because it was fantastic. I had a great time with it. I could see myself re-listening to this again because, again, the audio narration was top tier. It was so good. I loved it. It was fun. It was a good time. Okay, now this fantasy romance is one that's been on my radar for a while. It is House of Bane and Blood. So when I heard about this book, I heard it pitched as Peaky Blinders meets Six of Crows, and I was like, yeah, I'm here for those vibes, 100%. And I will say that it was very much giving Peaky Blinders. I've never watched Peaky Blinders. I've seen like TikToks with the characters and stuff. And a little bit of Six of Crows, kind of just in the way the magic is built up in, kind of like Six of Crows in the way that it's a very urban setting in a world that feels close to ours and magic is involved, but it's not. So yeah, yeah, that's an apt description of that. I will say that the whole time I was reading this, it was very much giving me Devil of Downtown by Joanna Shupe meets steampunk vibes. Like, and I love that series by Joanna Shupe. It's one of my favorite historical romance series of all time. I love that book very specifically, and I was just having so much fun with this, you guys. Like, I enjoyed this a lot. I gave it 4 stars. Now, this is another one, however, that I struggled to rate because I did have some issues with it. I had some issues with the world building. I had some issues with the plotting a little bit in the middle of it, right? But the vibes, the setting, the world, the way that it felt, as in like this Peaky Blinders type of time, this Gilded Age type of time, it was fabulous. Like, I was eating that up. I really enjoyed the way this whole book felt like that. All of that being said, I'm not a huge fan of the way this world is built, this fantasy world. I read a lot of fantasy. I don't feel like this author did a very good job of letting us know what the magic system is in this world, how it works, what the powers are, what the fantasy is even about. It felt very loosey-goosey, just using terms that are used in other types of fantasy things, like even like benders are used a lot, and like my only frame of reference to that is like airbenders in Avatar, which I don't even know a lot about. So, and I still got that it wasn't quite that. So I don't feel like the fantasy aspects in this story worked really well. I think you could have, and this is probably my biggest pet peeve with this, I think you could take the fantasy elements out of this almost entirely and the story would still remain solid. You know, it feels like if this had just been a historical romance, it would have been better in my opinion. But clearly, because I gave it 4 stars, I still really enjoyed this. I don't feel like this is a great example of a really great fantasy world. The romance carried this through for me, and I loved the romance. We have Camilla, our heroine, who is betrothed to someone who she thinks is going to save her family's iron railway business, which is on the verge of bankruptcy, and so she's she's going to basically be sold off into this marriage, very, very common historical fantasy trope. And in comes Nico, our hero, who has just been released from prison on this bargain that he does this work for this very powerful person. So Nico meets our heroine, and he is immediately drawn to her, and he actually has some very complicated feelings about her. And he decides that he's actually going to marry her instead. He kind of claims her and claims financial responsibility for her family's business so that it doesn't like get dissolved and bad things happen, and he marries her. So this begins a little bit of an enemies to lovers situation where we have our hero who, he's not brutal at all, but he is definitely the type of man that like you don't want to mess with on a dark street. Like, he's not brutal to the heroine, but he is brutal in this world and his abilities. He feels very much like a crime lord, almost like Devil in Wicked and the Wallflower. Like, he also feels like that type of hero. And I really, really loved their dynamic because this whole time she just very much feels like she doesn't have any agency, and she's so hungry and thirsty to be loved. She wants that so badly because her family has kind of betrayed her and hasn't cared about her, but she feels so connected to them still. And so she's the type of heroine that kind of comes to this relationship and she wants to love him, but she's also wary because she's like, does he even want that? Like, why did he want to marry me? Is this something that can work out? So I really loved their romance in this. I thought it was so beautiful, and especially the ending. The ending of this book kind of killed me a little bit. This is a duology, so this doesn't end in a happily ever after. But I'm gonna listen to the second book immediately because I just really, really loved the whole tone, the whole setting, the characters, the romance just worked for me on a really great level. I just loved it very much. Now, all that being said, there were a few issues with the plotting that didn't quite seem to make sense. The ending was good and solid, but sort of getting there it just felt a little bit contrived, like we were in these experiences just for the couple to be together, which I'm not against, that's romance, obviously, but I don't want to be able to see that that is why we are there. Like, I want it to be a little bit more cleverly done so it doesn't feel like, oh, well, obviously they're here so he can take his shirt off, Like, I don't really want that. I want it to feel natural. But when, again, like, this is just another one. I feel like I read 3 very interesting romances back to back that really kind of stuck with me in a big way. And I had a great time reading these, and I still feel like all I want to read is fantasy romance right now. So I really enjoyed these books. They are not without their flaws. If any of the things that I like, you feel like you would like too, and your tolerance for the things that I don't like, you know, you feel like you could get past like I did, then I would for sure recommend these. But probably my favorite for sure is Embers in the Snow. Then followed by House of Bane and Blood, just because I am such a sucker for that time period and that type of a romantic hero, like Devil from Wicked and the Wallflower, the Devil of Downtown. I just love it so much. And then the last one, which again, I just so badly wish this book had been edited better, because the kernels of a great story, of a great fantasy romance are there. Parts of the romance are really great, but the rest of it, man, it's not great. So that's disappointing to me. And that one really depends on if you really love that type of romance, and like you will probably eat this up. And I don't know. I liked him. Not a bad read in this bunch. And honestly, as much as it pains me to say it, my least favorite read of the whole bunch was Edgedancer. I'm so disappointed with that. And again, like, that's a frustrating experience for me, because it's not that the story was disappointing. The story was good. The story was classic Brandon Sanderson storytelling. And he really did a good job of presenting you this character. Their voice was unique and different. I just hated it. I hated that character's voice. It was annoying on every level. So, alright my friends, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope y'all enjoyed it. Let me know if you have read any of these, or if you want to pick any of these up. And if you want to leave me an emoji to let me know that you were here, please leave me a ladybug, and I'll see y'all in my next video.